out. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com podcast. My name is David Vignola. This is episode 22. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Before we get started, I'd like you to do me a favor. Please subscribe to this podcast, like, share, positive review if you find it helpful to you. Also, make sure you stick around to the end of the episode as I want to give you guys a couple of free gifts. This week's topic on episode 22, should you go to audio school if you want to become a professional audio engineer or mixing engineer in the music business today? That's a great question. We're going to talk about the pros, the cons, and what my thoughts are about audio schools. So sit back, relax, get yourself a cool drink. Let's talk about going to audio school right here on the HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com podcast. Okay, everybody, welcome back to episode 22. Should I go to audio school? Every so often, this question comes in through email from younger people that are just getting out of high school or in their early 20s, or they've gone to some kind of regular college, or they may be in their mid 20s and they're thinking about going back to college. And I've even get emails from time to time from older folks in their 30s and 40s thinking about going back to school. They want to be in the music industry. They want to be an engineer, and they want to know, should they go to audio school? Do they need to go to audio school? What are the pros and cons? What do you think, Dave? That's what I get asked. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I want to give you some pros and cons of each, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how I got started, because I did not go to audio school in the traditional sense. So you have audio schools like Full Sail, and there's other colleges, and some you can go and be on campus and be there in person. And now in today's day and age, they offer a lot of these things online. And I've done some research, Googled the cost of an audio school, an audio production. And they range widely in cost, depending on whether you want to go online or in person, and depending on the institution in general. So what I found is the typical cost of an audio school. Now, again, how long the school is, meaning how many years, how many months, again, will range widely depending on what you want to learn in the particular institution itself. But what I found was that the cost of going to a credible audio school to learn audio production and engineering starts at around $10,000 and can go as high as $50,000-$60,000, depending on the school, depending on how many years you go, and depending on what you want to learn, and also depending whether you go in person or online. Online typically is going to be cheaper, but being online, some folks would say you don't get the same education as being in person, especially when you talk about working hands-on with gear. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So first, right out of the gate, let's say, between 10 and 50,000, let's say 30,000 is kind of the midpoint. 25,000, 30,000 in that ballpark is where you're going to be. And you can say, well, do I need to invest that to be able to get a job in the music industry? What I typically tell people, and I'll tell you right up front, I did not go to audio school. I started my audio training, if you will, really learning on my own. Now, again, I started in the early 90s, really actually the late 80s, 1987, 1988, where in order to get a job in the music industry, you either had to go to some kind of formal training or audio school program, or you had to get a job in a commercial studio as an intern and work your way up the ranks, because back in those days, the home studio environment really didn't exist. The internet did not exist in the late 80s. There wasn't a YouTube, there wasn't a podcast, there wasn't training materials that were so readily accessible for you to learn the craft of either recording or mixing or mastering or audio production or equipment maintenance or anything else in the music industry. There were maybe some trade magazines, there were maybe some books that you could have read, but you really had to go be hands-on at a school, a degreed school, and or be lucky enough to get an intern job at a studio. And we've all heard the stories about interns that, would work at a studio and they would be a gopher and they would get people's coffee and take notes and wrap cables and do all that stuff for 4 or 5 years before they actually got a chance to really learn anything. And that was the old model of doing things. So back in those days, you kind of had to, although I did not. The way I started was, probably like I said, in the early 90s when, you were able to do things like record on your little portable, Tascam Porta Studios, little 4-track cassette studios for home recording. I kind of learned that way. I learned a lot of recording really starting in the live environment, playing in bands and being the person who ran the PA, understood the PA, learned about mixing boards and microphones and how to mic up instruments and drums, and how to do all that stuff in a live environment. Not so much recording, because as I said, back in those days, to record a live band was extremely expensive to do. You couldn't do it as easily as you could today with a digital mixer and a SD card. But learning all the basic techniques of how to set up instruments, how to mic instruments, how to get things to sound good coming out of the main speakers, running a mixer. A lot of those tools and training and concepts flow over into the recording studio. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the recording studio, but that's how I learned. That's how I started learning. By the time the mid-90s, early to mid-90s came around, where you could start recording at home on 4 tracks, and you could start doing, computers were starting to become more prevalent in the home environment. Things like when the internet hit in 1992, 93. And things were starting to happen online. And then digital audio workstation, that stuff. I got in right at the beginning stages of that in the home environment. So I learned by doing. Okay. I did work at some local studios, not as an intern as a gopher, but yes, as an intern as a recording engineering assistant, where I learned how to mic up stuff in the studio. And I was fortunate enough, my band at the time was able to record demos in this studio. And I befriended one of the house engineers who recorded my band for the demos that we did. And he allowed me to come in and work with him on sessions. I didn't get paid, but I wasn't a gopher cleaning bathrooms and fetching coffee. I had no interest in doing that. I really wanted to learn, but because I had a friend, he would let me come in and sit in on demo sessions, and I would help him, and he would teach me how to mic up stuff, and he would teach me how to run a console and how to record. And that's how I kind of learned. I learned by doing. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. In over several years, I was able to work my way into the home studio kind of niche and learning how to record and having my own home studio and learning by doing and trial and error. And I feel that's the best way to learn. And then eventually having a home studio business, because by the time I was good enough to do it on my own, the home studio thing was starting to really kick off, and people were having home studios and bands were paying people like me to come into my home studio and to record their demos. And that's how I kind of started. So I really didn't need to go to audio school. I actually never, ever really considered going to audio school. I didn't really, I guess at that time, maybe even didn't realize there was an audio school. I was just fortunate enough to play in bands and do the live thing and befriend somebody in a studio and got opportunities that way. And so I feel like that was a really good way for me to learn. So I never had to do it. Now, today's day and age, fast forward, we're in year 2020, 2021, and I think today going to audio school makes even less and less sense, and I'll tell you why. Number one, the cost of an audio school is extremely expensive. Now, you might be able to find a deal. Maybe you only take a couple of courses and you find something cheap, but a full-blown audio program, like I said, if it costs anywhere around 40 to 50 grand, that's a lot of money to get out of a school and not really have necessarily, doesn't mean you're going to get out and get a job in a world-class multi-million-dollar studio. Those studios are becoming less and less. And the people that are working in those studios, the competition to get into those studios is very, very fierce. And so you end up with this big bill at the end of your audio school training. And from what I understand and people that I've talked to about this, a lot of times you learn the very basics at an audio school, and you really don't learn as much as you think you should learn for someone paying that kind of money to go to audio school. A lot of still on-the-job training is required. And because today the information is so readily available, you really don't need it if you have discipline and desire and drive to learn it on your own. So let's talk, that's just my opinion, but I want to talk about the pros of going to an audio school, because there are some positive things that you may lean you in that direction depending on the type of person that you are. And I also want to talk about some cons. So let's talk about some of the pros first. So what are some of the pros about going to an audio school if you can afford it? Well, the number one thing I think is probably the biggest pro of going to an audio school is the networking and the contacts that you will be able to make that are tied to maybe even indirectly to the music industry, whether it's be your professors, your instructors, your other students. You're going to be able to network and make lots of friends, hopefully, in relationships with people that are all trying to do the same thing or are already doing what you want to do. So you don't have to go out from scratch and start meeting people. You're making lots of connections, and hopefully those connections will be able to serve you once you graduate from audio school. So I think that is probably the number one reason for considering audio school, because this is a relationship business, and who you know and friends and relationships that you develop will serve you very, very well in the future, where you can help other people and they can help you with opportunities for you in the music business, depending on what you want to do. The second pro is that you really get to work hands-on on great equipment. Now, this means if you're actually going to the audio school physically on campus. If you're doing it online, that's less, right? And because you're not going to be able to sit in a room with a real Neve console or a real SSL console. You're not going to be able to sit in a room online with racks of old analog gear. You're not going to have the latest and greatest technology at your fingertips necessarily when you do things online. You'll hear about concepts, you'll do things that are software based, but you're not in the room with other people, with an instructor. So if you are on campus, you get the opportunity to really work on equipment that you may never have access to, which is important. So you get some experience working on a console. So if you want to go to Los Angeles or to Nashville or to New York, and you want to one day work in some of the big studios that are left, if you're lucky enough to get in there, you'll have seen and physically touched a console, which is important, physically touched a real 1176 or a real LA2A or some of these pieces of hardware that, even though we're in the software digital world, in the big studios in the music business, hardware is still a huge component into recording, mixing, and mastering music. So that's important to get to work on great equipment, okay? Another real benefit about going to an audio school is you have a laid out curriculum or a learning plan. And typically your tuition will also include, hopefully, most of the materials and things that are needed for that learning plan. Okay, so you'll have a laid out curriculum. Here's where we're going to start. Here's what we're going to learn first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Again, that could be subjective on what's the best way to do that, but they have a plan and kind of a tested system to make sure that you learn at least the very basics. And you don't have to create that plan or when you're learning on your own, what do I learn first? What do I learn second? What do I learn third? They get all that nonsense out of the way and give you a nice plan. And then I would say one of the last things that's really a pro is it keeps you on track with your learning. It's a more focused learning system. Like I said, a laid out plan, it keeps you on track. You're held accountable for certain deliverables like any college, and it kind of forces you in a way to really, maximize your opportunity there because you're paying all that money. And if you're not the type of person who is self-disciplined and has a lot of drive and can do the research on their own to save all that money, this is a way to kind of get you there in maybe a little bit of a quicker fashion. Okay. So in summary, networking and contacts, number one, I think is the biggest benefit. Getting to work on great equipment, hands-on, that you may not have the opportunity to. You get a nice laid out learning curriculum and plan. All the materials and the information and the resources are provided to you. And it also keeps you on track with some accountability to make sure that you stay focused. Those to me are the pros about going to an audio school. Okay. Now, what are some of the cons about going to an audio school? Well, the first one that comes to mind, as we just said, is expensive. It's expensive. You're going to pay $40,000, $50,000 to go to audio school to get a job making $20,000 a year. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Are you going to be able to get out and get a high-paying job in the music business right away out of audio school? The chances of that are slim. Are there people that do it? Yes. Can you be lucky enough to get out of your audio school and go work at Blackbird Studios in Nashville? There are, I'm sure, people that have done it, But I got to think that there's lots of people that are all competing for very few spots in those kinds of environments. And therefore, the chances of that are probably slimmer. But there's also many parts of the music business. There's A&R, there's record labels, what's left of them. There's media, digital media, record tech or music technology. There's film scoring and the music and the TV licensing and those kinds of things. There's many different parts of the music industry that you might be able to get into because you've networked with all those people. But it's expensive and it's no guarantee you're going to get a job. The other thing that I've noticed, as I said, is a lot of times, especially from the recording and the mixing aspect, is the very basics are taught. I teach more advanced stuff in some of my training courses, and you get it in audio school, and my courses are $37. Now, I'm not sitting in the room with you taking the course like you would be at a school. But I mean, I can't tell you, I've talked to some students that have left audio school and talked to them and listened to some of their productions and stuff. And I mean, they learn the basics and sometimes not even the basics. There's not a lot of advanced training going on there. A lot of that happens in the real world. So to me, if you're only learning the basics, it's a lot of money to learn the basics, especially with just a little bit of discipline on your part. You can learn those basics at a fraction of the cost of an audio school. And then again, the last con, if you will, is there's no real guarantee you're going to get a job. You're going to have a piece of paper that says you went to audio school. What does that really mean? Does it hold some weight in different parts of the music business? I'm sure that it does. But before you decide whether or not you really want to go to audio school, you really have to do your research. You got to figure out for yourself, where do you think you want to be in the music business? What do you want to do? Do you want to be a producer? Do you want to be a mixing engineer? Do you want to be a recording engineer? Today, you have to almost be all three to be in the music business. Do you want to be someone who scores for TV and film? Do you want to be someone who creates music for video games? Do you want to, what do you want to do? I mean, you got to kind of think about, well, what things interest you? And then before you go to that audio school, make sure that they teach those things. Or do you want to be like an A&R person? You want to work at a label, those kinds of things. But we're talking about more engineering side. And then before you decide whether or not you want to drop that kind of money in an audio school, I would highly encourage you to try to find some of the resources on your own and get hands-on. Again, the technology today is you don't need to have a huge studio full of gear to learn how to do basic recording, mixing, and mastering music to turn out stuff that sounds pro level. You don't need that. You don't need to work in a studio with $1 million worth of gear today. It's fun. Big time records are still made that way, but you don't need to do that for a very small amount of money in the big scheme of things. You can record in Pro Tools or your DAW of choice. You could buy a couple of pieces of hardware, a compressor and EQ, some microphones, and you can learn how to do this stuff yourself at a fraction of the cost. And there is no substitute in my mind than getting in a room with the actual microphones, the cables, the instruments, the hardware, the software, the computer, and even if you had a small mixing console desk, and doing it yourself, which is how I learned. Going to audio school and learning conceptually out of a book the way things are supposed to be done, and getting in the room and actually trying things, recording things, listening back to things, mixing things, listening back to things. There's no substitute for that. And that you can do on your own. And here's another thing that I'll say to you. If you want to be successful in the music business, regardless whether you want to work for somebody else or whether you want to be an entrepreneur and be someone who either has their own studio or someone who's a producer for hire or a recording engineer for hire or whatever it is, and you want to be like a subcontractor, or whether you just want to be on staff somewhere, you need to have the drive, the discipline, and the work ethic in order to be successful in this business. Okay. And if you're going to school because you don't have some of the drive, the discipline to go out and learn some of this stuff on your own, you're probably not going to be successful once you get out of school and get into this business. Does that make sense? You got to have discipline, drive, a go-getter attitude, and be willing to experiment and try again in order to be successful, whether you went to audio school or not. So what I would say to you is the way to kind of brush up on those skills, which to me are still the most important of all the skills, is learn some of this stuff on your own. Before you decide to go to audio school, take a few courses, find yourself a mentor, whether it's good old Uncle Dave here at Home Recording Made Easier or whether it's somebody else. There are lots and lots of people out there, professional level, Grammy award-winning recording engineers, producers, and mix engineers that now provide online training. And again, it's a fraction. We're talking hundreds of dollars as opposed to tens of thousands. But you have to have the drive, the discipline, and you have to focus and be able to get things done and not have it all spoon-fed to you and laid out for you in a course. You know what I mean? And those skills that you need to be able to do some of this on your own are going to be the same skills that you're going to use when you finished your learning or as you've gotten far enough along in your learning to go out and get a job in this industry, depending on how and what part of the industry you want to be in. So in the end, would I go to audio school? I wouldn't say don't go to audio school, but here's what I will say. Don't go to audio school as a way to take a shortcut of being successful into this business. Do you need audio school to be successful in this business? No, you do not. Will it hurt you to go to audio school? No, it will not. But is it a shortcut to being successful in this business? I would say no. The one that works the hardest, whether they go to audio school or learn on their own and develop their own relationships without having it kind of all pre-built into a campus at audio school, those skills are going to serve you far better than just simply going to audio school. Does that make sense for everybody? I want to make sure that I don't want to discourage you from going, especially if you have deep pockets and you can afford it and you don't mind spending the money and you're going for the experience. It can't hurt you, but don't let that in and of itself make you think that there's somehow a shortcut, because I'm not convinced that there is for the amount of money that you pay. Doesn't mean you won't get a job when you get out of audio school. You may get a job, but I think you can be just as successful without going to audio school as you can with going to audio school, given that you are, willing to work hard, have the drive and the discipline, because that's how I did it. And I never spent a minute in audio school. But working out of studio and working on my own and learning how to do these things on my own and trial and error may have taken a little bit longer, but I was a hard worker and very disciplined. And so I learned much more, I feel, by being hands-on and by doing it myself and not having it all shown to me. And I think in the end, I was a better engineer for it. So I hope that is somewhat helpful and gives you a little bit of insight to whether or not you should go to audio school. It's a question I get every so often. I thought it would be a good podcast episode. So again, I want to thank you for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others because it really does help me. And I want to give you a free gift. I want to help you. If this is your first time here and you're brand new to the Home Recording Made Easy family, welcome to the family. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I want to give you a free gift. I want you to go to homerecordingmadeeasy.com and I want to give you a free mixing course right on the homepage. No audio school required. I'm going to give you a free training just so you can see what the training is like when you take stuff online from someone as opposed to going to an audio school. So get your free gift today. And also while you're on the website, check out the other training courses that I have. I have training courses on everything from EQ to compression, from mixing to mastering to recording. I got a whole bunch of training courses on the website. And if you find a course that interests you, I want to give you a 30% discount. Use the coupon code podcast30 at checkout. It will take 30% off any training course on my website. Okay, so do that today. And last but certainly not least, if you really love the craft of mixing and you want to learn it in a non-technical way, and you don't want to spend $10,000 to go to audio school to learn how to mix, come on over to mixingmadeeasy.net. And for less than $300 a year, you're going to have 12 months worth of training on how to become a better mixer to turn out professional sounding mixes in your home studio. So this is much cheaper than going to audio school. And in my mind, you will get better quality training. Check out mixingmadeeasy.net. All the links are in the show notes below. And until next week's episode, I've been Dave with homerecordingmadeeasy.com and mixingmadeeasy.net. And I will speak to you guys next week. Take care, everybody.